topic. All right. We are now live streaming over on our YouTube page and recording. It looks like we got some people slowly but surely coming on camera that are actually in the room, which would certainly make a round of introductions a lot easier on our end, but I'll try my best to go through them. Welcome to the second working group meeting. OCP is hosting our Metrc working group meeting. We had our first one about 3 weeks ago, which was incredibly helpful on our front. So I certainly appreciate everybody's time and support in that efforts a couple weeks ago. And of course, again, today, knowing everybody's time is valuable. But before we get into a recap of the first meeting and get into meeting number 2 agenda, certainly want to do introductions. So I will start with myself and then just go through the list as it appears on my screen. So from OCP, my name is Eric Gunnarsson, director of the agency, and have been with the team since we were established in 2019. And then also joining me from OCP, Vern, you want to go, and then John?
Sure. Hey, everybody, I'm Vern Malik. I'm the Deputy Director of Operations. I oversee licensing and compliance functions. Been doing that for a little over a year. And prior to that, I was the Director of Compliance for a couple of years. So sorry I missed your first meeting. I was on vacation, but I did have the opportunity to watch the YouTube recording of it. So I'm caught up on it, I think. Thanks for taking the time to be with us.
Great. John.
Hi, folks. I'm John Gagnon. I'm the Director of Data Analytics for the Office of Cannabis Policy. I spend quite a bit of my day in Metrc, so I'm right there with you. And I appreciate the discussion in the first meeting. I'm looking forward to the second meeting.
And then also from our team in the background with other screens on, helping with the technical side, we have Lisa Roberts, who's our Deputy Director of Strategic Initiatives, and Tracy Jakes, our Director of Special Projects. So thanks to them. If you see me looking over my shoulder at some point during the meeting, it's likely I'm chatting with them. But so intros, we will start with Elliot.
Sorry, I didn't unmute myself. My name is Elliot Lee. I'm the Director of Compliance for East Coast Cannabis Company. And yeah, thank you again for hosting these meetings.
Problem. Oh no, people are moving on the right-hand side of my screen. We'll try a different tact. Carrie John.
Hi guys, I'm Carrie John. I am a co-owner as well as the GM of our manufacturing division at Pot and Pan. We're located in Portland.
The Jakes.
Jake Daku with Blue Sky, a vertically integrated company. I'm co-owner.
And Jake Wisdom, CTO.
Perfect. Genevieve.
I'm Genevieve Bickford. I'm the Processing Operations Assistant Manager at Wellness Connection of Maine.
Let's go to Ryan.
Yeah, Ryan Parker here at Stoner & Co. We're a Tier 4 cultivation facility in Biddeford. Glad to be here.
Christine. Oh, Kristen, I'm sorry. Kristen.
I was wondering, I get called Christine a lot. I usually answer to it. Kristen, the accounting manager and system administrator at Wellness Connection of Maine.
Rebecca.
Hi, I'm the Director of Compliance and Track and Trace Administrator for Stoner & Co.
And we'll go with the other Rebecca.
Hi, I'm also Rebecca with Sensimia and Rugged Roots, the vertically integrated. I am the Compliance Manager and Metric Administration.
Right. Steve?
I'm Steve Resnack. I'm the owner of Full Bloom up here in Grand Isle, and we are vertically integrated.
Great. Matt?
Hi, I'm Matt Judge. I'm the VP of Compliance and the Track and Trace Administrator for Theory Wellness. We are a vertically integrated company.
Justin? Justice, sorry, Justice. You're on mute. Can always throw it back to Justice. Oh, there we go.
Justice Ryan Sweet Dirt, Chief Compliance Officer and House Counsel at Sweet Dirt. I'm also a Metrc admin for our cultivation operations.
Great. Ben?
I'm Ben Samuelson. I and my wife run Tier 4 Outdoor. We are seed producers and we're vertically integrated with another cultivation, which is a nursery. So we can sell seeds and plants. And we're called Seed and Soil in Monroe.
Lincoln? Oh, thanks, Ben. Lincoln?
Lincoln Crutchfield with Sweet Dirt, Track and Trace Administrator for Retail and Manufacturing.
Perfect. I promise you I did my best to make sure that I got to everybody, but everybody's picture is moving and names are moving. If you haven't introduced yourself, can you just pop up and give you the opportunity? I think we have Peter on the call, but haven't introed Peter.
Yeah, Peter Franklin here from Sweet Spot Dispensary. I do the retail management for them.
And I think that was everybody. Give anybody another minute. Great. So again, welcome to the second Metrc Working Group meeting. Again, thank you for your time in the first meeting. From our vantage point, it was incredibly helpful. Got a lot of details and a lot of great information that we can use to formulate the end work product, a report out of this working group and move towards conversations with Metrc based off of the feedback that we've gotten from this group. But just a quick recap, we did talk about a lot of issues and we used that to inform the agendas both for today's meeting and for meeting number 3. I hope everybody has received that. So you know up front the items that we'll be discussing in a little bit more granularity. But we had captured a lot of great information and great buckets around training, gaps in the system specific to testing and manifests, automation, testing, which was automation, support, transparency, the built-in reports, additional data upon transfers, Metrc support, homepage customization, and on and on. But we wanted to start today's meeting, we'll talk about training with a little bit more granularity. We've had some internal conversations based off the feedback and comments that you folks gave in our first meeting to develop some follow-up questions and to do a little bit of deeper dive to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what we can be doing better, what we can be engaging Metrc on to make sure that we're meeting the needs of you folks. Customer service, just to make sure that we have a clear understanding. So when we go back to our vendor in Metrc, we can clearly communicate and see if we can't move the needle on some of the concerns and comments that we had in meeting 1 and 2. The built-in reporting features, and then I think by that time we may have enough time to start dipping our toe into all things testing with a little bit more granularity. And then we can wrap up, talk about the items that are going to be on the agenda for the third meeting and next steps. So with that, I'm hoping everybody, I know we've developed meeting minutes for that first meeting. Make sure that those go out to you guys if you don't already have them. But is there any questions, comments, concerns before we just really launch into the first subject of the day? Any questions related to some of the topics for the first meeting? Makes it easy on my end. So, all right. So let's talk a little bit more about training, because certainly that's something on our end that we've heard that we can be doing a better job, that potentially we can ask and partner with Metrc to have additional resources. But before we get into that, I certainly want to give John the microphone to give you some updates on some of the changes that have happened over the last few months in Metrc that have an eye towards training. more than anything, just to make you aware, an educational piece. This is not a way of saying that we've definitely checked all the boxes in any way, shape, or form. But we do communicate this, and a lot of times people haven't heard about it. So I'll let John kind of give you a baseline understanding of some of those new things or new features within the current system. So John, you want to take it away?
Sure thing. Thanks, Eric. And thanks to the group for giving me a few minutes here. So I'm going to give you a little insight into what we might be seeing in the future and maybe give you some hope for some improvement. Thank you all for your feedback last time. As Eric said, it definitely gives us some ideas of where we need to be improving things. Right off the bat, so just to make sure everyone's aware, you might have seen that Metrc launched this new piece probably about a month or two ago called Metrc Learn. This is kind of a subtle piece. Yeah, the website changed a bit, but I think it has some benefits for the industry. The first one is, many of you might remember your new business training where you had to schedule a time to take a pre-recorded video, and that was probably a little silly. Well, good news. It's improved slightly. So the new business training is still required. However, now you can use this Metrc Learn piece to kind of really watch the video on demand. So you don't have to limit yourself to the 3 times a week where it's offered. And that's really the foundation for a platform that Metric's going to be using going forward. And I think it's going to lead to some benefits over time that I think the industry will appreciate. We certainly heard folks last time that the new business training is pretty generic, maybe doesn't get into enough of the deep corners that specific lines of business need. And we have attempted to start addressing this. So some of you may have found there actually is an advanced cultivator training that we posted a few months ago. It's not a required training, but the idea was it would focus on the pieces of Metrc that are a little bit more interesting to cultivators. We had started working with Metrc on similar ones for product manufacturing and potentially retail downstream as well. But we actually kind of put things on hold a bit because we had some rule changes that were coming up that would actually impact not only our future trainings, but perhaps require us to redo some of our past ones too. There's some pieces in there that might need to be updated for the rules. So more specialized training coming there. And really, I think the biggest benefit of this new platform is I think it's going to give us the opportunity to work with Metrc to create really shorter, much more focused videos, even if it's just a 5 or 10 minute video. Now that they have this Metrc Learn piece in there, and you can basically keep track of which videos you watch, the required ones, the not required ones. Maybe your employer will require you to take certain ones. I think this is building a good framework for us to be able to do that. So more like the experience that you'd have on YouTube, where you jump in, watch a really short video to learn one specific piece, and then go about your day. So those are all things that we're looking forward to working with Metrc to bring to folks. Hopefully that helps a bit.
Great, John, thank you for that information. So this is the part that I want to turn it over to you folks. And again, the idea is to get a little bit more granular so we can start drafting really concrete proposals, what we can do at OCP, what Metrc can do, what we can do as a partnership to help fill these gaps of where that training is. So I'll open it up with a question, and whoever wants to take the mic can go. Jake, do you want to add something? Yeah, please.
Yeah, so as long as it's broken down in modules, basically just try to follow the workflow of a typical cannabis business from cultivation right to retail, and just follow the plant through. Have specific training based on cultivation, harvesting, and then when it goes to manufacturing or how to transfer out, stuff like that. So, make it logical for us to use is all I'm kind of voicing right now.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess that actually is a great segue. The first 2 questions, they're kind of one and the same, but very high level, like outside of the new business training and the advanced training, I saw a couple of nods. So I guess there are some individuals that have seen that advanced training. Where are the gaps? Like what specific trainings are needed? And then Jake just kind of hit the follow-up. Like, what's the best way to move them forward? Is it really by buckets of license types? Some of the authorized activities? Do you segment shorter videos, longer videos? But just really open-ended question. And we'll start with Elliot and then Ryan.
I found it, I've done the advanced cultivator training, and then I've also gone into the learning center and taken all of those where they have multiple more cultivation, manufacturing, and they have a retail section, but there's nothing in there. I think what's difficult about all of the trainings is watching someone in a monotone voice complete these tasks and not being able to do it yourself. It's hard to follow along without a sandbox. And I know a lot of people here have gone with a lot of other APIs, a lot of other software systems where they give you a sandbox to play in first. So I'm watching this, I'm understanding the video, and then I'm making a tag, and I click it's a production batch, but it shouldn't have been, it didn't need to be. And now how to delete that tag and move it back. It's one thing to watch someone do it. It's an entirely different thing to be the one clicking the button, to be the one moving the pieces. And a sandbox would really accomplish that. And it is a very standard item that a lot of these softwares have when you go into launch. And for some reason, Metrc doesn't do that. So you can watch a lot of trainings and you can go on YouTube and see their stuff and go to the advanced cultivator training. But at the end of the day, you are going to be given a live metric. You are going to be putting things in there. And if you do it wrong, like we said before, it's there for forever. So if we could have some sort of state sandbox that we log into and we can play in that can get wiped every day or wiped every other day or something, that would be incredibly helpful, because it is important to do the task, not just watch someone else do it, at least in my experience.
Come off mute there. Can I ask a real quick follow-up question, Elliot? So you've obviously been in the system for a while now. Is it something that we may have missed our opportunity to have the sandbox for those new users and those beginners? Or is it something where you would still go in there, and as the regulations continue to change, like session after session, where you can go and play around?
For sure. New people come into the business all the time. New people who are running new aspects of it, who have not used Metrc, who don't understand it, who do need to take the trainings, who do need to go through it. So I would say it's two-part. Yes, we missed it probably for everyone in this room, but we're not the last ones who will end up using it. There are many other people who will end up using it, many other people who haven't come into the industry yet to use it. So it would continuously be helpful, especially as rules change, especially as people come in and people go out. That toolbox could always be very useful, I believe, for anyone who's learning to use this. And I think we'll always have people learning to use this.
So, sorry, another follow-up question. After the second follow-up question for Elliot, we got Ryan, Justice, and Ben. Can you explain to the group and us so we can better understand how we could best utilize a tool? So you have new staff coming and going. I'm assuming that it's more than just you that's interacting with Metrc, or are you like the single touch point? I would imagine that you have kind of fail-safe.
Yeah, we do. We have a lot of people who move around in Metrc, who do things in Metrc. You know, we allow our head cultivator to operate their Metrc. We allow our lab manager to operate their Metrc, our kitchen manager to operate their Metrc, our retail manager to operate theirs. So a lot of people are kind of key in different areas of this Metrc. And then from there, there's even tasks delegated downward. If you look at a retail store, you may have somebody doing receiving of products as it comes in. We may have transfers of trim coming from cultivation to the lab, and we have to have someone going in to accept those. So there are many people who would use it. I don't want to say it's everyone in the company. It's absolutely not, but it's more than just one person using it. And those people do change. They go on vacation. They do whatever their lives require. They might get sick or something. And we need to train someone to learn how to do it. And the only way for someone to train is to sit there and let me, you type it, you do this. Okay, perfect. Now we click it. This is the next step. So yeah, there's definitely multiple people who are involved in touching it in different aspects of the business, especially as you're vertically integrated, for sure.
Awesome. Thanks, Elliot. So again, it's Ryan, Justice, Ben. So Ryan, floor is yours.
Yeah, I'd like to definitely agree with Elliot. Sandbox is definitely something that a lot of these other companies that we're all seem to be familiar with are utilizing and allowing the new clients to use. Another thing that we've seen a lot of people do is just having like an onboarding specialist. So somebody who you can contact for the first week that you're implementing the service. just somebody who's there, not 24 hours a day, but during normal business hours, who can just answer questions. And you don't have to wait through like Metrc's phone system, which could take hours to just ask a simple question. That would be something that's very beneficial. And also what we've used at Stoner & Co. is just like, I guess you'd call them like SOP documents. So documents that basically just show you, hey, if you're going to transplant a plant, or if you're going to cut clones, like step by step with screenshots of what you need to do to accomplish that task. And that's kind of what's utilized in the Metrc training. Again, I've done the advanced cultivator training, and like Elliot said, it's like a lot of just listening to somebody tell you how to do it. But then when you get in there, you really don't, I guess, absorb much from it. And then you just need to like do it without any consequences. So that's pretty much what I would like to see, a sandbox, and then maybe somebody that we could contact either at OCP or at Metrc directly, that would just be there just for that onboarding part of the system. So
Ryan, you're the second one that brought it. Well, you and Elliot. So I can totally understand sitting there watching videos, pushing that aside, and then getting launched out of Canon and trying to figure it out and make those mistakes. Is it something where this may be a real silly question, but there was conversations around the wizard, or you can just have on a separate screen the video playing while you're in the sandbox environment to kind of go along with the individual that's giving you the tutorial. Am I thinking about that right?
yeah, and I think in the advanced cultivator training, I believe there's sections where like it shows you a video and then it gives you a section to just try that move that they did, but it doesn't go all the way as letting you do multiple moves at once. It's just, here's how you move one plant from one room to another. Now do it. And then immediately once you click do this task, it shows you the next video. So there's no like redoing it, or it's been a while since I did that training, so I'm not really sure exactly if I'm remembering it correctly. But
it's helpful. Thank you. Justice, Ben, and then Genevieve.
Thanks. I just wanted to reiterate what Elliot was saying about the sandbox. We have created SOPs, which, mirror exactly what we do, using the same naming conventions that we use, using the same room locations, because a lot of that stuff can be pretty confusing to somebody who's looking at Metrc the first time. So we've created them that have, everything that we already use in our system. But one of the problems is that if I'm going through a process, unless I want to report it, as we said, and conduct it, so I have a couple of SOPs that I've been waiting for that activity to happen, to complete. If I had a sandbox, I could roll right through any number of scenarios, build those SOPs. They're perfect for us because they use our nomenclature, they use our room names, they use everything that we do. And actually that lightens the burden on you and Metrc, because we can create our own materials then as well, in addition to that are tailored specific to our processes.
Ben.
Yes, I'll echo that a sandbox would be awesome. And one thing that's helped me just avoid little hiccups, and that I've also extended this help, is like I sold somebody seeds once, and it was their very first interaction with Metrc, the very first thing that their license did. And he calls me up and he's like, it's asking for some kind of a location. I don't even know. And I was like, oh yeah, you like go into admin, you can just create a location. It's like a place in your facility. And so that sort of operator to operator interaction, I don't know if it would be, there's any way to formalize that or make a network of just users helping users, but it is a productive way. And I know there could be a pitfall with it, like Metrc wants its software to be used the way they want it used for compliance and everything. But anyway, that's been helpful for me.
No, I mean, that's an interesting point as far as those type of like almost like a buddy or mentor system. And I'm thinking about the way you could actually operationalize that in real life. I'm thinking of like, would it be helpful to have like a Metrc administrator or a Metrc user forum, like on the OCP website, or is that just, we build that out and then nothing happens? Or would that actually, where you could search questions and it would be a little bit more detailed from your end as opposed to like a frequently asked questions where you have like 10 things thrown up there. You might be able to search and find the specific issue or you're confronted with and see.
I mean, I don't use a ton of social media, but that sort of live forum type environment, if there are users that are looking at the forum regularly, then they're like, yeah, give me a call, or answering a question right there and people can comment on that answer. I'd probably use that. It honestly, I'd peruse that and see how other people are interacting with the software, because, you know, I know how I do things and the result is what I think I want, but there might be other approaches, like just seeing how other people think about it. I feel like I'm in a vacuum sometimes, you know? Yeah,
Well, maybe we'll explore that a little bit further with the group or with you. Genevieve.
So I just want to reiterate the whole like sandbox area is really useful. So we use it to figure out how we're going to process things through the system a lot of the times, because sometimes we imagine, well, we just click this button and it's going to work great, but it doesn't. So before we make an SOP, we can use that area to make sure that we're doing things right and it flows through the system correctly, and we don't end up with something hung up in the system because we didn't do it right.
Yeah, I think that was in line with Justice's point, building out those SOPs you haven't encountered certain situations, so they're not fully developed or drafted. But if you had that SOP or if you had that sandbox, you could go through and just get those all kind of moved off your docket.
Yeah.
So I think I touched upon this. Oh, Steve, I'll let you fire away before I go to the next question.
Yeah, thanks. So Eric, in the beginning, I heard you say, like, did we miss our chance? You know, if the sandbox does, you know, come into play and it becomes something real, anybody with an ISC number that can access Metrc should be able to sign into it at any time. Like, it shouldn't be just for new users, you know? Like, we should be able to go back to that whenever we want, basically.
Oh, yeah, no, and I agree. And that was part of the clarifying question for Elliot, to better understand, like, new employees are coming and going all the time, and he's not just the one. There's obviously the managers that are in charge of the. So yeah, absolutely. On top of the fact that it seems every year there's significant changes to the program, which require system build outs. Before somebody does an off-premise sale or a delivery or something, they can go through that and see what it looks like set up within the system, so they don't screw up the first delivery or whatever it may be. So point well taken. The second question, trying to think a little bit more universally about it, and I brought it up on the first call, but I wanted to revisit it on this one, about what is the best way to deliver these trainings, because I think there's multiple different ways that we can do it. Absolutely heard on the videos, absolutely heard on the sandbox environment. But we had kicked around the idea early on about doing in-person trainings, regional trainings. I love the idea of the forum, if we get feedback where people would actually use it. So we know that we're putting money and time into it. It's going to, at the end, be a benefit to the group. But checklists, SOPs.
Sorry, Eric, we just lost your mic.
Yeah, we lost your mic, boss.
My computer did that thing. Am I back? I'm not kidding, I'm not kidding. It just muted itself. Sorry about that. So I don't know how much you heard, but I'll quickly recap. But in thinking through the best way to put these trainings in front of you, heard on the sandbox environment, heard about the videos, a little bit more granularity, maybe split them up. But do you think it would be beneficial to do in-person trainings, more granular, chopped up videos? Are the like the paper documents that we put together helpful. Pictures, no pictures, because we certainly want to commit resources to this and have these conversations with Metrc and continue the dialogue with these groups. But help us think through that so we can start to put together an actual action plan here. So I'll go to Elliot and then Jake again.
So I think the form is a really good idea. I think it would take a lot of resources to maintain it because the rules do change so often. Right now on that form, there would be a certain way to do tests. That moisture content would be on there and it's no longer there, or that final form testing takes place and now things kind of change. So it would need constant monitoring. And I fear for bad information getting out into many places because people believed it and said, no, it worked. The system let me do it, but we shouldn't have been doing it from the beginning. So those are my two fears on the form. But going into the regional trainings, I would again say, you know, the difference between watching a video and sitting in a classroom, to me is still very similar. If I'm not being able to click the buttons and I'm not being able to move the needle physically as the person, the moment I leave that classroom, I'm still going to have to go back, sit at my desk, pull up Metrc and pull the trigger on what needs to be done to move things through this software. So I think it's a good idea so long as maybe computers or something are brought with that regional training so that people could sit down and take a real Metrc experience, which is truly pulling the gears and moving the levers of this software and then also fixing the issues. Because right now we're talking a lot about how to know what to do, what's the right thing to do. But one of the things that I think everybody in this meeting did was things wrong and then learned how to fix them. Sat on a call for hours trying to re-kick a package out or move a test sample through, or that sort of institutional knowledge is also really important, I think, in the learning process. Beyond making sure you do things right is learning how to fix the things we did wrong. So I think that the regional trainings would be a really good tool. I just think at the end of the day, so much of this comes down to physically doing the work that needs to be incorporated in whatever method we go about choosing. If people are just watching videos or just being taught or just reading a slideshow or just looking at forms, they'll never get that full in-depth experience, which I think comes from actually clicking the buttons. But that's just my opinion.
No, that's well taken. And you actually highlighted one of the challenges that we have about stale and outdated information, why it's hard to commit to developing all of these resources, knowing that you're going to have to go back and change them all every 6 months, every year. But maybe all these changes will stop at some point. Who knows? But it's certainly something that we need to do. So thank you, Elliot. Jake.
Yeah, I think Elliot pretty much hit the nail on the head there. But just to add on, I think even just kind of like back to the basics and like maybe even some guidance on OCP on how you guys are wanting things to be done in there, because as you know, everybody said, it kind of comes down to like how people figure out how to do it for themselves. Then there's a lot of different ways to do it. But we've experienced a lot of like people having absolutely no idea some of the basics and like needing to essentially help get their whole metric set up. And it then kind of falls on like other operators who have already done it to like work on doing that for somebody else.
Yeah.
So I think that just kind of shows that there's a gap in that like super basic training that Metrc has to offer. And I think the sandbox would be huge, but also just kind of like a like step-by-step breakdown and walkthrough of some of the things and the way that we're supposed to do them from cultivation through retail.
Yeah, and one of the easiest things that might be able to be done to achieve some training is just the continuing onboarding training that we could sign up for as like a company. If we have new hires, we can schedule like an hour or two block, you know, so many times a year to sit down and maybe get a refresher on how to do things. And it's just simple, you know, screen sharing, and we could click and make the actions and actually learn from it.
Because a lot of the things that do come up, like for people who have been doing it for a while, are like not something that we would have thought to ask or something that you come up with until you actually hit that problem. So.
Oh, good. Ben, and then I got a couple more questions before we try to stay on schedule and go into our customer service conversation. So Ben.
Okay, so I don't want to sound cynical, but why is it on the state to provide training to use Metrc? Like, doesn't Metrc, shouldn't they be teaching us instead of you guys?
Yeah, no, and again, Metrc has been great with us. They know we're having these meetings and they're open to having the conversations with us. And I think we just don't want to eliminate any pathway available to us. I would imagine that any training would be done with the wonderful team of Metrc and have them come here and do that training, potentially have that sandbox environment. But we also have resources here. So I'm not saying it's falling to the state to do it. We're just trying to figure out what resources we need, what needs to happen, and then basically figure it out, put a plan together.
Very diplomatic. Cool.
Yeah. All right. So the follow-up questions, again, before we put a bow on this, has been incredibly helpful. As far as just so we can have an understanding and a launch point now, and I'll kind of group some of these questions together, but what's missing or what could we do to improve the current trainings now? So your new business training and your advanced training, the way they are now, outside of the sandbox and going along, because that's certainly a different piece. And then are there any main specific items that have caught your attention, whereas the system or the training could do better guiding potential or future users along specific to main regulations? Or does it seem like the trainings now, they don't have any of those gaps where just the generic new beginner training is hitting the mark essentially on what it's trying to do? I probably explained that poorly, but I'm hopefully anybody could come up with any feedback around those. So Elliot.
I think that the trainings as they are good. I mean, they are what they are. You know, it's what you're going to get. I think if you're asking like, how do we improve it? You know, you've heard advice on get more in depth, do more videos. You can't do enough of them, from testing to the in-depth look at a lab side manufacturing versus an in-depth look at a edible manufacturing. I think trying to say like what was wrong with them, what's good with them is a little difficult, because at the end of the day, they are what they are. I mean, they are videos and stuff. And a lot of what, you know, I think we've talked about here has been that physical side of it. Now, when we look at, I would say, main specific issues, you know, one of the ones that we ran into early on was when we did our first fresh frozen harvest. Categorically, those items were selected as buds flower, and we paid taxes on them as though they were buds flower. And then we found out later on they should have been categorically done as wet flower. And we had to call Metrc and sit on the line. I personally was on 3 separate calls over 2 hours long, re-explaining this issue to move through it. And I'm sure this isn't an issue. You'll get this issue in every state, that the taxation on this is different. And the explanation of something that seems like such a finite detail, such a small and insignificant thing when you're making an item, could have such monumental impact down the line, is also something that really should be looked at. I mean, you do movements in Metrc all the time that seem idiotic they seem unnecessary, such as what location is this sitting in, right? That's seemingly okay. It's in flower room 1. It's in wherever it is. And then you have the inspectors come in and they say, well, you know, you're in clone bank 1 or seed bank 1. Where is seed bank 1? What room is that in? It's like, oh, it's in the vault. Okay, well, that location needs to be titled the vault, not seed bank 1, or you physically need to locate it and describe it as seed bank 1/vault. And again, you look at this thing like, I didn't realize that this was going to be as serious as it was. The training certainly didn't lead on to that. And I think that the difference there is in that how the inspectors, how OCP looks at the software versus how Metrc looks at their own software, and making sure that the trainings kind of balance those two perceptions so that the third person looking at it, the actual user of it, can get a good flow of not only how Metrc views themselves, how OCP views it, so that we can operate within that as well. But in general, do they have a lot of main specific things in there? No, I mean, the trainings were very general for a very long time, to the point that I think it makes it difficult to say that there is anything main specific about it, because they were incredibly, generic from their beginning, from their conception. But to reiterate the other point, though, there are some minute things that you can do in Metrc that cause major damages down the line that the trainings really don't grasp the severity of them.
Yeah. Thank you, Elliot. Anybody want to add anything on the training front? This has been very helpful before we go to the next agenda item. Incredibly 3 minutes ahead of schedule. Great. So
sorry.
Yeah.
One thing I'd like to add, I think, we've touched, a couple of people touched on, they've created their own SOPs around things. And I think there's something to be said about Metrc creating some SOPs for all of these functions where we can use them as guidelines until we have them. Because as a new store, grow, processing company, you don't have those SOPs until you've made your mistakes, until you've gone through the processes. So having Metrc create an SOP for green waste, for moving things from room to room, from, accepting deliveries would be super helpful, at least to have like a guideline to go on before you have a real SOP created, because you've now just gotten, access to Metrc.
No, I think that was Peter. No, that's very helpful. Thank you. All right, I think we can continue the conversation, moving on to the next agenda item and talking about customer service. And I will say we've heard this feedback from our industry partners, and we've developed some follow-up questions that will help us better understand where we can improve, where we can have the conversations with Metrc. And in full transparency, I will say that we are engaged in conversations with Metrc now around SLAs, service level agreements, and they've been a great partner in having and being open to that conversation, understanding that they certainly want to be meeting the needs of our industry here in Maine. So kudos to Metrc on that front. So we have some questions to get a little, again, more granularity. Where exactly are the issues? How can we address them to continue those conversations with our partners over there at Metrc? But I will kick things off, unless, John, did you want to add anything to that? Or are you good?
I think you did a great job.
Yep.
I just wanted to acknowledge it. We know that there was an issue, especially in the spring and the early part of the summer, where, we hear you. So I mentioned I spend a lot of my day in Metrc. I don't see every support ticket. That's what Metrc does, but I see a lot of them. And, we certainly noticed some that were taking longer than they should have. And do know that we do have those conversations with our vendor behind the scenes. And I think we are definitely looking for ways to at least measure and track this going forward. Because what we have heard from licensees is kind of what we were seeing on our side, was that there was a certain standard for resolution timeframes, and Metrc did a great job, and then things went down a little bit. On our side, I'm seeing improvement lately. Hopefully you've been seeing improvement too. But I know, if you were one of those unfortunate people who would get stuck on hold for a long time before getting a person, I know how long that memory can stick with you. And all I can say is, like Eric said, we're working with the vendor to find better ways of measuring that and tracking that and improvements going forward.
Thanks, John. So I will say, in our first meeting when we brought this up and had conversations about some of the long wait times, I can't remember who actually said the comment, but they said initially it was really good, and then things got really bad. Was it you, Ben? I guess our question is, when did you start to see that decline?
I think I had a lot of questions for Metrc for a while, and it would have been like, through harvest last year, and then like into maybe November of last year. And then I was chill. I just didn't have much to do. And then come spring, yeah, it was like a totally different support line. I mean, they used to pick up the phone. You'd call and you'd talk to somebody. I don't know when. If that's the question, is when did it happen? I don't know.
Spring-ish, maybe. Okay. Well, we got 2 hands raised, so just open-ended, Ryan and then Jake.
I didn't really have anything about the Metrc service. I did just want to say that when we were first starting, Heather at OCP was a phenomenal resource for us. Oftentimes when she had something that we could ask her, instead of going through Metrc, we would always try and hit her first because she was just a great resource. So sad to see that she's moved on to bigger and better things, but we really appreciated her here. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for the feedback. We love Heather, and I will say her bigger and better things are still within the Office of Cannabis Policy. We would certainly not let her go. She's a fantastic human being. So thank you for that. Jake.
So specifically, when the service kind of goes out the window is when another state is coming online in there for Metrc. They kind of focus on the onboarding of that state. So when Kentucky was first getting online, it was weeks waiting for a service ticket, and right to the point where they blamed it on the fact that they were onboarding another state. So it'd be nice to know how many other states are coming on so we can expect maybe some delays in service when that's happening. Be kind of preemptive on that. That's it.
Elliot.
No, I completely agree with what Jake just said. We ran into the same problem with Kentucky, and when Connecticut came online, it was the same thing. And we had been told through both on the Kentucky one and on the Connecticut one that they were taking so many calls from different states that they were getting them mixed up. So even the answers they were giving us, especially for the Connecticut one, really messed with us because they told us to do X, Y, and Z, but they were like, oh, wait, sorry, wrong one. I gave you the bad ticket number. That was for a Connecticut call. So I would definitely agree with Jake on that one. When they onboard a new state, get ready because it's not going to be great. And I think that's where you see those consistent declines. Where like as before, we started up here, they onboard a state, you move, they onboard a state, they move. And it's sort of hard to go back up and look at exactly when it started to go wrong because it's a progression of downward and a lack of progression upward, I would say.
And then we also, so just so I better understand how you guys are utilizing Metrc and those back and forth, some touch points. Does anybody on this group use the email as well, or are we most of the time? Okay, what does the response time look like with the email interactions? And then I want to talk about resolution times, just so I have a understanding. So anybody that just nodded their head to the email thing, feel free to come off mute and give us an idea. So we'll go Justice, Carrie, John, and then Genevieve.
I think in our experience, it depends on what you're emailing them about. I've had emails never get responded to. I've had emails get responded to within 15 minutes. But again, the testing team invariably is, it doesn't matter how you get to them, you get hung up no matter what.
So the more technical and difficult questions.
Yeah, if you're and I think that they blame you, meaning OCP, a lot for their own slowness because what we get a lot is, on the second or third query, well, we're still waiting for OCP to greenlight that. So I don't know if it's true or you're getting thrown under the bus, but it's almost invariably when we've pushed them a couple of times on something, and then they'll come back and say, well, we're still waiting on OCP. And then it usually happens pretty quickly after that.
Carrie, John.
Yeah, I have to agree that it really depends on the issue or glitch at hand. I definitely find that the majority of the stuff that I'm reaching out to them for is typically a glitch that has to do with like that downline of testing and stuff being held in limbo. And my most recent email communication was not responded to for well over a week. So and with calls and emails from obviously the labs as well. So double dinging from, two people using the metric for the same, like trying to resolve the same issue. And it's kind of, it's a little disheartening. So.
And Carrie John, I think I heard you, that was around a testing issue.
Yeah, I have been struggling a lot of I think it's a glitch. No one's ever confirmed, but like a testing in progress. And it's typically when something has passed testing successfully. And it just kind of gets frozen in this testing in progress issue. So it would quite literally be like a nudge to push it through on the Metrc side. So I'll have a ton of inventory, quite literally past testing in packaging, unable to be released, which you'd think, there'd be like a way to gauge the amount of time it would take to rectify an issue like that. But I think I get lost in the mix with a lot of the larger issues for something like that.
Okay, I have Genevieve, Rebecca, O'Connor, and then Rebecca, and then we can go to John, just to make sure. I want to make sure that we all have a shared understanding of what that relationship between OCP and Metrc looks like when we run into some of these tickets. But Genevieve.
I find we get things hung up in the system with testing a lot, and we can usually guarantee 24 to 48 hours before we get a resolution if they don't divert it to OCP. So there are a lot of the times where they tell us that they have to go through OCP to make sure that it's okay and stuff like that. And it holds up for production a lot.
Rebecca O'Connor.
I agree. Testing is our biggest holdup as far as getting a response back from Metrc, but I've noticed if I email them and I include OCP in that email thread, I get a faster response. But having a ticket number every time you talk to them is super important too. If you have a phone call, you have to have that ticket number to reference back to make it faster for their side. Otherwise, you're going to be explaining the whole situation again. And I almost give them the ticket number and I say, it's okay if you put me on hold while you read through that, but read through it and then talk to me again. So I think it's the biggest holdup right now is in testing. If there's anything at all that's just a nudge from Metrc, it can be anywhere from days to weeks.
Hopefully you don't regret giving out your secret there. Rebecca.
So I just wanted to also reiterate that with emails, we've seen anywhere from a day to a week response time to resolution. And I just recall one specific instance in the very beginning where we were working with Heather and we had sent a support ticket to Metrc to get ahead of it. We also contacted OCP to let them know the situation. I can't remember specifically at this moment what it was. But Heather had emailed them with the ticket number, with the approval to go ahead and do whatever process it was that we had needed, that they told us we needed OCP's approval. It was, another 3 days of us calling them every day before our owner had to get on the phone and say, hey, what's going on with this package? We need to be able to sell it. And it took him talking to them 3 minutes before they were like, oh yeah, we did receive that communication. We'll get it taken care of. So 3 days of communicating with them, that was completely unnecessary because it had already been communicated from OCP. So I think their awareness could just be improved there.
So Ben, you got your hand up. Ben.
Yeah, I just thought of a time I interacted with Metrc where I really had to be on the phone with them on the computer. And, we were going back and forth with email and they would call me and I was away. I basically couldn't schedule a call and that just caused a slowdown. And it just reminds me that seems like something that they could do is schedule a call. Then it's, because I do everything and I can't just and it's nice. They did call me back probably a day, 2 days between, but then I wasn't available. So that's one thing maybe they could do. Have somebody on staff that could schedule times to talk to people.
John, do you want to come off mute and explain to them the process when Metrc comes to us with tickets, when they don't, and what role we have to play, just so we have a clear understanding of the process?
Sure, absolutely. We want to be transparent about this, and we want folks to understand how things are working behind the scenes, because I know silence is not a good way to relay information. So let's break the silence. All right. So just so folks know, when you're reaching out to Metrc support, so that is a shared support system that's shared with multiple states. So like a lot of software companies that you might reach out to, there's typically usually like tier 1, tier 2 support. So the folks that you may be getting on that first call might not have the answer to your question. They might be able to handle some of the simpler questions, but really are capturing those questions to get relayed. And I can absolutely agree with the group that the ones that seem to take the longest are the testing tickets. And I just want to share a little bit of logistics on that. So with testing tickets, anything that would require the change in a status in a testing package, that actually has to go to a dedicated group in Metrc. Based on my understanding, it's a testing team. So that is a dedicated team that all they deal with are testing issues. So that's where it's transitioning from one section of Metrc to another. And it is true that that team will do their research for that specific ticket. They'll document everything. And at that point, if a change is needed or authorization is needed from the OCP, it typically goes to my team. And that's when folks like previously Heather, now we have some new folks on the team that are getting involved. I often look at those tickets myself and sometimes respond directly to Metrc or the licensees on them. That's typically where the OCP jumps in. So although I'm glad to hear that you get great service when you CC OCP on your tickets, I would ask the team to kindly don't do that for every Metrc ticket, because we got a small team, you'll kill us, and we really won't be able to separate out the signal from the noise. So those really high important issues that we need to focus on, we want to focus on those. And certainly if it was an issue that might be interest to compliance, like if you had a theft event or something like that, yeah, certainly reach out to the OCP and give us a loop on that. But maybe not every ticket, please. On the testing front, it bleeds into a little bit in the next section too. It's certainly that we've been talking about internally at the OCP. We're thinking about new ways where we might be able to structure the testing piece a little bit, because you're right. If there's a case where someone might select a wrong test, then it gets stuck in that submitted for testing phase. Metrc, at the end of the day, it's just a piece of software, so it expects to see things in a certain way, certain tests for certain products. And if there's anything out of the ordinary, like if you chose potency and fused and you were dealing with flour, Metrc doesn't know what to do with that test result. So they put it in that submitted for testing phase. And yeah, those tickets that typically make it to us, those usually don't require a lot of research to make it to our team. And we try to move those through as quickly as we can. But I don't want to steal our thunder for the testing piece. We know that that's the biggest issue. And we are trying to come up with new ways to address that.
Yeah, John, thank you for sharing that with the group. And again, I should have put this or said this up front too. The rest of what we're going to talk about at the end of this meeting and meeting in number 3 and potentially any future meeting after that, again, are what are things that we can do to minimize those touch points, minimize the amount of times that we need to call Metrc or OCP just by process improvement. I mean, that's the goal. That's the dream, right? But still an important part of the conversation. So I guess the last question, again, a little bit ahead of time, unless anybody else wants to share, understanding that you have the difference between the initial contact and the resolution time. And I think I understand, but there's a spectrum of things that can get tripped up on in Metrc, and depending if it's more technical or if it's testing, it can certainly be a longer resolution time. But from your perspective, because I can make assumptions, should we be more focused on those initial response times? Because I hear calling on the phone for 2 hours. If you can get somebody sooner than that, you could potentially get to a resolution right there and then. Or is it the intermediary after you've talked with somebody or after you've gotten that email reply? Have you gotten to the point where you are able to remedy what issue you've run into within the system? Again, may seem like a real basic question, but again, not trying to make assumptions and trying to wrap my head around this and our team to better understand as we have these conversations with Metrc. Elliot.
I feel like the question there is a little bit like, would you rather not get into car accidents, or would you rather have good safety equipment for your car accident? And I mean, at the end of the day, we'd like both, you know, but if we had to pick, I would say the response time on the testing side would be better. Listen, if I've got to sit there and shoot an email off, and the initial round is going to be, we just have these workers that are sort of sorting through thousands of calls from 20 states, trying to get them in the right pools. I would rather a quicker solution when I get to the pool than in a more difficult tunnel to get there. Then once I get there, sitting for 3 days, having to loop in OCP, having to call 3 or 4 times, repeat my ticket number, the testing teams blaming you, blaming anybody in there, anybody else that they can. I would rather see a faster result on that end and understand that it will be difficult up front. But again, I mean, I think it's kind of, you'd hope for both. But, you know, I think if we had to pick which one they would work on, the faster turnaround times from the testing stuff, the more in-depth detailed ones, for me personally, I think would be better. And that may not be the same for everyone. People may say, you know, I'd rather get sorted quicker, get on the call faster. I don't want to sit in a queue. I want a faster response on my email. But just for me personally, I think that by the time we get to the testing pool, the testing team, and the more in-depth serious questions, a faster resolution would be better, because by that time we've already waited 2-3 days. And if we had a commitment, we've probably already missed it.
Anybody else on this front? Ryan.
I don't know if just for this sake of conversation, if there was a way through Metrc to just kind of leave the testing sample open until even after the testing facility has received the test sample. I don't know if I'm explaining this right, but if we could just, if we want to sample some product, send it to the lab and leave the testing parameters for that sample open until even after they've accepted the manifest. If there was a way to do that, I think it would alleviate a lot of the issues that we're having.
What issues is that going to alleviate? I'm just trying to make sure I'm getting at.
A lot of the times it's just like somebody forgot to click one of the 11 or 10 parameters that need to be tested for flour, or, you know, or the lab gets it and in their system, they think that they're only supposed to test for a certain number of things, but you really wanted them to test for the whole gamut for that compliance test. At least from my perspective, that seems to be the biggest issue. And usually when they accept the manifest into the testing facilities, you know, inventory, then it's closed, and what you selected is what is going to happen.
And Rebecca.
Just to kind of give an example off of what Ryan was saying, when the moisture content got removed from testing, we had, you know, submitted a test sample that selected moisture content because that was previously on the docket for what we were supposed to select. Lab has our results. They tried to put our results in, and now Metrc has our package on hold because there's nowhere to input that moisture content. So now it's in that limbo where if we were able to go back and unselect that moisture content, they, you know, wouldn't have to put that in.
Yeah, no, and I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves in this conversation, because we are hoping to start at least the conversation around testing. And kind of, I think you kind of dip your toe in the water of automation and things that we can do better, configurations that we could ask Metrc to do to help streamline or take away the opportunities to have that data input entry error that will result in things getting hung up. So with that, thank you for that. That was incredibly helpful. I'll let anybody have anything to add before we move on to reports. Great, thank you. So reports was one of the buckets that we had from our first meeting, kind of building out or better utilizing or restructuring what the reports look like and could have to offer for industry users within Metrc. So we wanted to do a little bit more of a deep dive with that piece. But before we get into that, I wanted to give the mic again to John, opportunity to talk a little bit about what's there and really the function of Metrc. So before we get into the back and forth, have Director Gagnon here.
Thanks, Eric. I'll try to be brief because I do want to hear from the industry on this and find out what you need. Just to make sure that folks know, there is some reporting functionality built into Metrc. It may not have everything that you want for every line of business. For example, for a cultivator under the reports section, they might have information on harvest and things like that. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes I forget that those reports are there too, and I feel a little bit silly. I'm like, oh, I could have just run this report. But I think it kind of ties back to an earlier topic that we were having about training. Although I think they do briefly mention the reports in the training, it might be worthwhile to, those dedicated trainings that we were talking about, have one that's really just focused on how you fill out those parameters for those reports that they do offer in order to get the most value out of them. I think that might be a good opportunity for one of those dedicated shorter videos. So that's something that we'll likely want to explore more. And with that, really, I wanted to open it up because I wanted to hear what folks think. Do keep in mind that, Metrc's core function is really a regulatory system. So their core piece was probably focused on the regulatory piece. But as I believe Eric has said before, there's a tremendous amount of data in that system. And we know that it's data that can help you do your jobs. And if that's something that we can do, certainly there's lots of third-party vendors out there that offer products to integrate with Metrc that do some of that. But I think there's an opportunity in Metrc to produce some more reports that help you on that path.
Thanks, John. So we do have some questions to ask to get answers that we're looking for again for us to move forward on this front, but we have 3 hands raised, so I certainly want to go there first. We have Elliot, Genevieve, and Steve. So Elliot, the floor is yours.
I just wanted to say real quickly, like in response to John, and I've used those reports, they're not very usable. A lot of the times you pull it only into an Excel spreadsheet and it has numerical values as well as alphabetical values in the same cell. So you have to do a lot of internal editing to even begin to use the reports that they do give you, which are limited at best. So I just think that I know that there are reports that they do and some training around them would be good, but I think just structurally how they send out those reports is not helpful. I mean, the amount of editorial work you have to do on those reports to get a semblance of an idea of a possibility of a bit of information is difficult at best. So I just think that they're built a little poorly because of their empirical and their numerical and alphabetical combinations in Excel. That really causes formatting issues. It causes formulation issues, pivot table issues. You can't really analyze the data that they give you without some serious editing of that data. So that was all I wanted to jump in there originally.
Genevieve.
One of the biggest hurdles I have with reports is that you have to know what your oldest active package date is. So we go back all the way to when we flipped to adult use, so that we make sure that we get everything that's in the active tab. And if we don't do that, we could miss things. So it'd be nice to be able to pull up all of your active inventory without having to know the oldest package date. And another thing, just to add to what Elliot said, is if you pull a CSV report, it puts the alphabets, like the grams and pounds, in a different column from the numbers. So it makes it easier and you don't have to do that formatting. And that we found that helpful. So we switched to that here.
Can I ask a probing question about the oldest? Can you help me understand what the report is that you're trying to run and how that ties back to the oldest package date?
So when we do our daily reconciliations here, we have to pull everything that's active. So we have to make sure that we have everything in there.
Steve.
Yeah, so specifically for me, the manufacturing report for inventory point in time, there's no quantities in there at all. I mean, it'll give you a list, but you don't know how much of each item is is in your inventory by that report specifically. And you know, like what Elliot said and the others have said too, just the reports could be definitely more presentable in a way where they're easier to decipher and to use, you know, because basically we're all using reports for something. We're not just pulling those for fun because we like to stare at them. So just making them a little easier, clean them up, and just to have all the information that's possible on each report.
Great. John, you had a question for the group?
Yeah, sorry to jump in again. I just was curious for the group, you know, we've been focusing on the reports, I think mostly the canned reports that are built into Metrc. I was just curious if folks use the interface itself to, so we were talking about packages. If you filter out the packages and they have some functionality built there where you can filter what's in your grid and then you can export the whole thing to PDF or a printout if you want. You know, probably another area where we should have more training on to show people how they can take advantage of that. But I'm just curious if, you know, maybe just a show of hands if folks are using that functionality or if they're just using the canned reports. Okay, good. So it sounds like some folks are making use of it. I find myself doing that a lot of times when I'm researching an issue is I'll just filter based on something and export it to Excel. But Elliot, I definitely hear you on the formatting issues. I spend a lot of time in format hell. I'm with you there. Thank you all.
All right, Ben.
Yeah, I was also thinking about the sort of native format where you can just look at all your active packages, for example, without pulling an admin report. And I didn't know if that's what we were talking about, but ultimately that's how I would use a report, is like I'm looking for something in particular. And so feedback on that functionality is the sorting and filtering there. It could be a lot more like Excel and then just more usable. Just show me every unique thing in a drop down and I don't have to think so much about typing in what element that I'm looking for. So that seems simple. That would be really useful.
Thanks. So that's kind of a segue into some of the questions that we did have. But before, I wanted to get a better sense. I mean, to John's point, Metrc at the end of the day is a compliance tool, but there certainly is a lot of data. And I think there's a shared interest in making sure that we're all successful here. I think the vast majority of us last time when I pulled the group had third-party software with an API. Can somebody speak to some of the reporting supporting features in the third-party software? Are we utilizing that, or are we still trying to leverage reporting functionality and reporting features from the Metrc system? So Elliot, Genevieve, and Justice.
I would say yes. I mean, you kind of have to. Metrc doesn't. Metrc is just so bad that you kind of have to use a third-party software to do it. And I think if you look at a lot of third-party softwares, they say, you know, we integrate with Metrc, but as you heard maybe in the last meeting, there's a lot of breakpoints with that integration, such as when you do transfers or the reporting or how Metrc wants to talk to it, because Metrc is Metrc and it is selling itself to a state, not the operator. They have a certain level of, well, you know, if you can't connect to my API, it is what it is. If it's not a perfect connection, you got to deal with it. And I think that kind of dismissive attitude from Metrc makes it hard to have a third-party software integrate perfectly with Metrc because of their lack of support around integration. So I think that, yes, we have to use a third-party software. Yes, we have to pull reports from that. I understand that Metrc is not really that software, but its dismissive attitude toward connecting through other APIs to make that process easier is difficult. If it's not going to be the software to do it, then it should work with other softwares so that we can.
Okay, so I think we got to part of it. Genevieve, we'll go to you next. I guess my question is, if we did have the conversations with Metrc about potentially bolstering both the reports that they can run, the canned reports that they can run, and the functionality within those reports to make them more useful, are you folks going to go to Metrc and actually utilize those, or are you going to leverage the ones that are part of your third-party software? I think so. Genevieve.
We use a lot of reporting in our third-party system, but we use it in conjunction with stuff that we pull from Metrc too on a day-to-day basis. So if it was easier to use, it would be helpful.
Justice.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also say that, it's important for whether or not you're using an integrator for us to get good data out of Metrc, because it's a great way for us to know if our integrator is doing the right job too. Because at the end of the day, what matters is Metrc versus reality, right? If there's flawed reporting or deficient reporting, someone's ERP provider could be deficient, and then we wouldn't have that check and balance, right? But I think that, this is not just happening in Maine, the integration issues, the API support. This is happening all over the country, as I understand it, with their API integration performance, I guess you call it. Yes, they're built for regulators, but you regulate us. So it has to work for us too. Whether or not, I guess it's a long way of saying whether or not we're using reports from a integrator or not. What if we switch integrators? What if we have to reintegrate with somebody? And we still need some robust reporting from the Metrc side to be able to know if it's being done correctly, so we don't get taken advantage of by other integrators.
That's perfect. That's helpful. Jake.
Yep. So, I mean, if the functionality was there, I would absolutely use it, because just like Justice was saying, at the end of the day, Metric's the real world versus the real world of inventory. We have to make sure both match. So I like to pull my reports right from Metrc if I can.
Matt.
I just wanted to add that Metrc is the software of record. It doesn't really matter what our third-party softwares say if Metrc is incorrect. So I want to trust my Metrc reports, and I want to be able to pull my data from Metrc. I want, for example, the harvest reports to have a breakdown by category of packages pulled from those harvests rather than just dry weight. That would be helpful for me. I think Metrc is a database with a software sitting on top of it. So the data is there. If they were to invest a little bit more in the reporting functionality of it, we would all be in a better space.
No, that's great. And that will segue me nicely into now that we understand that you would certainly utilize it, and there's a conversation that we could have there. It's the way I'm thinking about it, it's two buckets, right? So what canned reports or what reports would be most valuable if we were to build them out? And then we already touched upon the functionality within those reports. Some things in the reports that live there now within the functionality could we improve upon? And I think it was Elliot, yeah. We heard about the numerical and alphabetical figures in the same text box, but I saw Ben pop on. So again, what canned reports can we make available, or would be most useful to you folks, and then the functionality with those reports. So Ben.
What I would say about which reports is to focus less on redacting a nice report for different purposes, but just kind of to echo what Matt was saying, it's a database with software on top of it. I'd like to see that entire CSV of the history of interactions. And that way, then I can filter and trace it down. Even if it's a pure CSV, we're pretty savvy, and just that way I can find what I'm looking for that really happened in Metrc. I don't need it to be very fancy or pretty. That's personally myself. I mean, maybe I'm wrong because I don't know what a database actually looks like, but if it could be a spreadsheet or a grid, that would be usable.
Elliot.
I mean, I would say some of the reports that they have now categorically fit what we're looking for, from inventory to output to production, to, volumes of sales, where we transferred things to, what was coming in, what was coming out, what were our yields? Do you know what our wet weight was? What was our, fresh frozen throwaway? What did that yield out? It has all of these data. It knows how much fresh frozen went in. It knows how much product came out. It knows how long it was growing for. Through all of these things, I feel like I could write a 17-page paper on the reports that we would like to know. But I think that, categorically, it's a fairly straightforward idea because they have a lot of the data that we're looking for anyway. So, I mean, for a top 10 list of reports, I would gladly pull together an email and shoot that off to you, Eric, just so that we can get that down. But I mean, off the top of my head, those types of things, from production outputs to returns to grow times to waste to inputs. A lot of those things would be really helpful, and a lot of third-party softwares are doing that. So we can easily pull together a list. I think, it's hard to go off the top of your head for what major ones you'd like to see, when I think categorically, like under an umbrella, they did get the 6 major type of reports we'd like to see. They just need to expand on them a lot more. We need to get a lot more granular data. We need to get a lot more line of sight on all of these, different aspects of those reports. I think that would be what we're kind of looking for. And I'd be happy to shoot off an email to OCP about some reports that we would like to see, for sure.
No, yeah, and I understand what you're saying on that front, for sure. I would still be happy to see that email, but I understand what you're saying. I'm assuming Justice's hand is still up from the last time, but does anybody have anything to add on the reporting front?
Hey, Eddie Benjamin here. Sorry, I was a bit late to the meeting. I had a minor family crisis I was handling. All good now, though. I just wanted to mention that I am personally a third-party integrator, set up as a company that, just basically for our own company, because reporting was so terrible. I was able to, through working knowledge of SQL, basically whenever I want reports, I go directly to the API to pull data that way. And the data is just from that perspective, the data, while there's a pretty steep learning curve, once you're familiar with how the data is set up in Metrc, the API is pretty good for what is available. There are certain nuances like transfers and some things that can't be pulled out, and I think everyone has mentioned those and they're all aware. But the data that is accessible through the API is reliable. It's never down as far as I can tell. And the support team from the
I think we lost you, Eddie.
Okay. I wasn't, yeah, Eddie, if you pop back on, let us know. For some reason, I thought my computer did that thing where it muted itself, but we turned out we actually did lose Eddie.
Oh,
sounds like he's back.
Hey, sorry about that.
All good.
I was just saying that the support team for the Metrc API is very good. So for those integrators working with the data directly out of the API, I've always been impressed with the responsiveness in the support from an entirely different support team that only handles integrator questions. So, for what it's worth, if I guess regular Metrc support could be as good as the API support, that would be appreciated.
All right, I'm too stoked about knowing that the guts are available of Metrc. Eddie, you're saying that any person, you can just know SQL and get all of your data out of Metrc?
You need to go through the Metrc approval process. They sort of test your abilities in a sandbox, and you need to sign up as a company. But it is, through that, after that process, it is available.
Huh.
So it's not incredibly, if you know SQL and you know Metrc, to be able to tap into their API.
I don't know those things. Well,
You
close
don't
enough cigar.
I think Eddie's being a little modest. Yeah, if you know how to write SQL code, which certainly I don't. But all right. So with nothing to add on to reporting, still ahead of schedule, we can dip our toe into testing. I think we probably have about 15-20 minutes where we can start the conversation around testing. And I think we have a pretty good idea where we're at, but to see if we can't get any more, again, granular or additional tidbits of how we can improve that, not necessarily on the customer service front, but making the process more seamless, talk a little bit more about the automation possibilities or potential there. in some of the more granular issues that you may have run into repetitively, that would be helpful on our end as we try to figure out the best way forward there. Again, with the idea of making the system a little bit more efficient and minimizing the back and forth between Metrc customer service and OCP and John's team. But first I want to make, I want to let John, he's the one that heads up the customer service or the interaction between our agency and our vendor around the testing things. We talked about a little bit, but John, do you want to just jump in here real quick?
Yeah, sure. I'll just take a couple of minutes. I think we already started to introduce this subject. So again, full acknowledgement that the testing tickets, some of the most challenging pieces in Metrc, and certainly the often the longest response times are with testing. And I did mention that we're looking at a few things on our side. For starters, we have the new testing rules that took effect on the 8th. So apologies to everyone that got stuck in the moisture content shuffle. It was a bit of a gotcha there. So what was being described is those new rules took effect on the morning of September 8th. So at that point, the moisture content was removed from Metrc. But folks who had submitted a test and those test results hadn't been recorded by the testing facility yet, they got kind of stuck in that not submitted phase because the testing facility wasn't able to record the moisture results because that test wasn't there by the time test results. So do know that my team actually prioritized those tickets. They typically made it to our team fairly quickly. We tried to turn them back around, get them authorized as quickly as we could if we didn't see any other problems with the testing. But speaking of the new testing rules, it kind of changes the dynamics a little bit. So we definitely heard from folks, hey, why do we have to click all these buttons for the different tests? Part of that was to give us flexibility. As a lot of you probably know, the tests that you need for flour, let's say, if it's going to retail, are one set of tests. If you were sending that flour to a product manufacturer for extraction, it's a different set. If it's wet flour, it's a different set. And then when you get into the retest scenarios, there's a lot of permutations about what's required for those retests, depending on what failed and for what type of product. So that's why those tests are set up the way that they are in Metrc right now, just to give us ultimate flexibility. But we are certainly having discussions internally about if there would be a different way that we could structure that to make things simpler for folks. I just wanted folks to be aware of the challenges there. But with this new version of testing, it kind of actually makes the whole mix a little bit more complicated about what gets tested and where licensees have more options. We expect that some folks may choose to push things closer to the final form version of the product and run the tests there. Yeah, it just makes it a little bit more complicated on our side, but do know that we're listening to you. I do think that the final form, for some of you, final form will make things better because you won't have as many testing events to go through, but some of that workload might shift further downstream. So we'll be watching to see how things work there. The other thing sort of related to testing that had come up, there was questions about licensees wanting to be able to see the entire testing history for a product. I completely hear you. I think part of it is perspective, right? So if I was a retailer about to accept a delivery of a cannabis product, in theory, I'd want to see the history, the entire history for everything that went into that. But do realize that's in some cases, that's a pretty complicated history. You know, when you're talking about an edible that might have been made from a batch of concentrate that might have come from multiple packages of shake and trim, potentially even multiple cultivators that went into that. You might start with that one brownie at the end. And if you were to search the whole tree backwards, and I've done this, you may wind up with 100 different packages in that mix. And in some extreme cases, much more than that. So that's an awful lot of data to pass along. That's just the data part of it. The other part of it is that OCP wants to be respectful of licensees and not overly expose people's inventory information. So again, it might be a little bit of a perspective. If I'm receiving that product, I want to know everything about it. But if I'm the one sending it, maybe I don't want to expose my entire inventory, how much product's coming in, where it came from. So those are concerns that we wrestle with too. But do know that we are certainly talking through things. It's a complicated piece. We know that this is a frustrating piece in Metrc. It's where most of the tickets get hung up for a long time. And we're interested in working with the industry to figure out what we can do to make this easier for both of us, frankly, right? So we want to spend our time serving you in a better way than chasing down Metrc tickets. And if we can make it easier for you, it'll be easier for us. So we're all on board. That's me.
Thanks, John. So with that, again, last time we did have a lot of conversations around testing around certain pieces of information that could be made available before the transfer, automation, so there's less chance for just like data input errors or checking the wrong box. But really, I think we did this last meeting. Just as far as testing is concerned, I want to make sure that we're clear on our side some of the top priorities of things that we can change and or make better as we go back and have these conversations with Metrc and put together a report and see if we can't move forward. So again, this is going to be similar to the first meeting, but more 30,000 foot, more general. And then we can ask more probing questions here over the next 15 minutes. And then if we need to revisit in our next meeting, we'll have that opportunity to. So really just an open invitation for anybody to jump in on the testing front. So Steve and then Elliot.
Yeah, so I think, as a manufacturer and anybody else who tests, I imagine can piggyback on this, but if you miss one of those tests to do, like if you're just clicking and scrolling and clicking those down and you miss one and send it off, the lab's got to call you back. You got to pull it off the transfer. You got to modify it. You got to put it back on the transfer, and then it goes back to the lab, right? So anything that could, make that easier, just to like click a flower button or an edible button, and it just loads up all of those. I think we talked about that last week. I just kind of want to reiterate that. It's not really the biggest of hassles because it's an easy fix, but it's still time spent fixing something that, if it was simplified, you wouldn't have to.
Right.
And that's pretty much all I got on that.
Elliot.
Now, I want to reiterate what Steve said there. I think the crazy part for me is that Metrc knows what tests need to be done for a concentrate, an edible, trim, fresh frozen, buds, flower. It knows through the system what tests have been done, especially in regards to final form testing. So the system should be able to tell us that if you want to move it forward, if you'd like to turn it into this product, these are the tests that it needs to have done. And at this point, it would just simply be OCP talking to Metrc, telling them that these tests are needed for these products and these products have received these tests. So these are the ones that they need. Having this back and forth of us needing to click all of these things that change, especially with final form testing, how this all impacts it. I think it could be done a lot easier. And I think Steve, hit the nail on the head there with that there should just be a very simple button to click this, and Metrc should be smart enough to know what tests have already been done and what tests are still needed. So.
I had a quick question, actually. In the event,
please, sorry.
In the event that we get hung up in the testing department, does our 30-day clock get extended the same amount of time?
Can you ask the question again? You chopped up.
If we fail a test.
Yep.
And that's if we fail a test and then something that's remediable, and we remediate and then go back, that's often where we get hung up, and that's submitted for testing loop. But we're still bound to that 30 days to make a decision on what to do with it. We're going to remediate it, do a petition for destruction, do petition to send it to extraction, things like that. Is that 30-day period when we get hung up for 4 or 5 days or a week, is that 30-day period being extended as a grace period?
Well, hey, everybody, this is Vern. I can probably take that. The dirty little secret is that we don't really hold anybody to the 30-day clock. We monitor it. I know we've had emails with you guys at Sweet Dirt about products that have been sitting for over 30 days. And, it's Yeah, it's in the rules. It's something we treat more as an ideal state, a goal. But we have not issued one order of destruction because somebody's gone over the 30-day limit. And usually we'll give you another week before we even start to rattle your cage. So I hope that's comforting, even though it's not really spelled out anywhere well.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to kind of elaborate on that, we made that decision early on to be reasonable. We didn't want to be sending out destruction orders left and right because you have all of these little things that pop up, like what you're saying. So, no, if you would call us and be like, "Hey, we're past the 30 days. It's been hung up for 14." We're human beings on the other end of the line. Like, we'll get it. So, Ben.
Right. So Elliot was talking about how, and everybody was talking about how Metrc should just know what testing is required. And I definitely heard John describing that by leaving it open, like a la carte, it allows flexibility as the rules change. But there's one piece of functionality that Metrc uses when you're making a manifest, like you can save a driver or save a vehicle. Possibly they could build in a template of the same style that would allow you to save a test flight for your stuff. And then you'd fill down and test your, however many, sometimes 18 packages. You just sit there clicking individual buttons for 15 minutes. So yeah, maybe save a test flight.
Interesting suggestion. Yeah. Look, on this front, I think there's definitely a pathway forward, and I think OCP, this group, and Metrc would all benefit from it. So it seems like this is a big one as far as trying to figure out a way to get it right, or at least improve the current process or the current system, the current way it's laid out, to help alleviate some of these headaches that you folks are seeing and having to live through. Does anybody want to jump in on the testing front? I'm assuming, Ben, Justice, those hands are up from earlier. If not, we can go back and start drafting out what a proposal may look like on this front. If we generate some further downstream questions for you folks, we can bring them back. But John, you want to jump in real quick?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to highlight one other thing from the recent rule change that might help folks out a bit. In the past, you could go ahead and send test failed products to a product manufacturer for remediation without any interference or involvement. I shouldn't say interference, involvement from the OCP or Metrc, right? You could do that. I just want to make sure that folks are aware that with this rule change that just went into effect on the 8th, you can actually now send retest failed, so that's retest failed products to a product manufacturer without explicit authorization from the OCP or Metrc. So one thing that folks got hung up on in the past, hopefully that saves someone a little bit of time there.
Elliot.
I just have a quick comment question really about final form testing. This comes from working with our lab, in that I believe both our lab and us were very shocked at what final form testing actually was. Because I was under the assumption that final form testing was if I do my full panel on cultivation on my flower, and then I move it to my manufacturing lab, the only thing that might need to be done would be residual solvents, heavy metal, potency, homogeneity. And that's not the case. Micro needs to still be on there because of a possible change, and more or less kind of the only test that actually would carry over are heavy metals, pesticides, and residual solvents, and nothing else carries over. So I think that that was a massive misconception from at least us and our lab on that front. I thought final form testing would be a lot more useful, and it's in its essence kind of a nothing burger, because some of the most time-consuming tests, such as the micro, aren't off there. And I mean, in reality, we've only shaved possibly 3 tests and some of the most cheap tests as well off of that kind of bulk amount that we have to do. So that was just a misconception, I think, on our part.
Well, we should connect offline to kind of talk through those new requirements in those regulations, specifically about micro, like true final form, letting it get to the end, and then doing those tests versus which ones can be checked off earlier. I just want to make sure that what you guys are doing now is actually right. Because that change was an industry push. So anyway, Elliot, we should connect offline to talk that through. Ryan, you came off mute. Did you want to add anything, or?
I was just wondering if we could go a little bit over that now, if we have a few minutes, just because I'd really be interested to hear a little bit more.
Just real high level as far as what happened at the legislature, that final form. There's really two pieces. So when we heard the original proposal, we were thinking final form is true final form, like right before you transfer it to retail or right before it ends up on a store shelves. You need to make sure that that product, whatever it may be, whatever item type, gets the full panel of tests, right? So that's easy. If it's a cultivator, you're sending flower to retail, then it has to have the full panel of tests. However, if you're sending that flower to a manufacturer to be extracted, and then that manufacturer is sending it to a kitchen to be turned into an edible, and then that kitchen is actually sending it to the retail, the full panel of tests only needs to happen on that final product before it gets transferred to retail. That would have been clean, easy, and good. However, the way that the bill was written, and the language in there allowed for some of these other panels to be run before you get to the true final form testing, which would omit them from final form testing. And those were, you can test for pesticides from when you transfer it from a cultivator to check that box. So downstream, it wouldn't have to be tested for pesticides. And the same for heavy metals and residual solvents after they go to a manufacturer, right? So a little bit confusing. The part that worries me as a regulator is, to John's point, we discussed it earlier, is like some of those end products that get transferred to retailers are coming from hundreds of different packages. And at the end of the day, the liability to make sure that they've all been tested is going to be whoever touches it last, essentially. So to make sure that, all right, all of these 50 packages this one product has basically come from have had all the appropriate levels of testing. It's a little nerve wracking, and I'm hoping that we don't get to the point where we're able to catch it and have a collaborative effort in making sure that that doesn't happen and those untested products don't end up on retail shelves. But that's kind of high level. Your what we call your choose your own adventure in the office. So you can do true final form. You can skip all the testing all the way up to the point where it's going to go to retail, or you can check off some of those pesticides, heavy metals, and residual solvents before final form testing. So whatever's left for that product before it gets transferred, that's your filth and foreign material, that's your potency, your microbials. Does that make sense? God. Maybe.
I mean,
Well,
I would say it makes sense to me, Eric. I understand what happened there. I think there was just maybe a bit of a misconception in the industry about what that was going to be and what the carryover to it was. But I do understand what you're saying, where, you can just send trim, fresh frozen right to the lab, get it processed, take that, live or that distillate, whatever you're using, send it right to a kitchen, get that into an edible, and then that edible would carry the full panel across the board.
right.
I really was under the assumption that if I tested my full panel flour, that those tests would carry over right into my concentrate, where now I've run it through a machine and I've used a solvent. So I need to retest that, understandably, but then it goes into an edible. And really the only thing we need to make sure of on this one is potency and homogeneity. We've tested the microbial. Testing concentrate for microbial makes no sense. No lab, except for money-hungry labs, would tell you that a microbial test on concentrate makes sense. It doesn't. And it's a 5-day turnaround time. I mean, I'm okay with, frankly, all the rest of the tests. It was microbial I was hoping for, and that was really because of the duration of it. So what you're saying does make sense. I think that I was personally overexcited for what I thought it was versus what it turned out to be.
Yeah. Steve.
To what Elliot's saying, I think the reason for the microbials on the edibles is because it's still getting processed and in a kitchen. Sure, we're all licensed by the Department of Ag, and I'm sure we all have our SOPs on cleaning regimens and things like that. But but there is a chance in the kitchen that a microbial can get inputted into an edible that would get to a customer if you didn't test it at that last level. So it makes sense to me, and that's the best how I could put it. Maybe Elliot, if that helps you, you know what I mean? But yeah, that's what I had to add.
That's certainly the reason, you hit the nail on the head there, why that wasn't one of those choose your own adventure options as far as testing upfront. So thank you for that, Steve. But again, outside of the conversation around Metrc testing, we always want to make sure that we're a resource and able to help you folks. So if anybody has any testings around questions, we have individuals on staff that can help answer questions. I'm happy to have those conversations. Vern's happy, Lisa's happy. So feel free to reach out. But with that, we're doing pretty good on time. So we can head into the next agenda item, which is closeout. And I doubt this is going to take 15 minutes. So we might actually wrap up a little bit early, but I just wanted to call everybody's attention to the agenda items that are going to be on deck for meeting number 3, which we'll schedule. So the first agenda item is testing continued. I'm not quite sure whether we're going to need to have that on the agenda or not. We'll have the internal conversations and see if we have additional questions that we need to bring back to you folks, so we can make sure that whatever final work product and conversations that we're having with you again in Metrc is basically the questions that we need to be asking. We're going to delve into the API issues. So be thinking about that. We're going to try to get a little bit more granular on improvements that we can be making on the API. Automation, we dipped our toe in that with the testing conversation, but certainly I would have to imagine in conversations with Metrc, and there's things that we can do, whether it be customization or configuration, and making things a little bit more automated, a little bit more seamless. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more granularity and detail, so we can put together concrete proposals. And then those user experience gaps, which I'll have to say was, I did not think that was going to come up in meeting 1. I'm happy it did. That was certainly monopolized some of the conversation earlier on. So we're going to be talking about those gaps a little bit more in depth about exactly where they are and benefits of trying to fill some of those for the user experience. So basically it's an ask from us to be kind of thinking about those things before we have our 3rd meeting. So I guess you can consider that assigned voluntary homework. And before we wrap up, I wanted to poll this group. So as I've said on the first call and this call, Metrc does know that we're meeting, does know that we're having these conversations. They're certainly listening, and we're going to be having a dialogue with them, and they're a partner in this venture. And in full transparency, we're going to be meeting with them a little bit later this week to talk about some of this stuff. But I wanted to get a sense from this group. Do you think there's value in bringing Metrc to the table to talk about some of these items, really being the subject matter expert on their system, how it works, and to speak to some of the feedback that we're receiving? Because certainly if this group think there's space for them, we certainly want to see if they would accept an invitation to come and have that conversation with us in the next meeting or potentially the 4th meeting. So be thinking about that. I saw a lot of nod of heads where it looks like it would be beneficial and this group would be open to having them during some of these conversations. Is that a fair assumption? Okay, cool. Love the new checkmark feature. Fantastic. All right. So yeah, again, we are meeting with them a little bit later this week. We have been meeting with them, having conversations on a number of different fronts. But we'll have that conversation and see if we can encourage them to come join us and have this conversation and figure out exactly how we're going to best utilize them and extract value from the time that they are with us and what we should be talking about. So with that, really, again, you have the agenda. Ryan.
Do you have any last minute, do you have any information or timeline as far as single plant batch tagging? Is that something that we can talk about?
Yeah, oh, happy to. So those are one of the many things that we have been talking with Metrc about. It's really been about what the batch tracking is going to look like, what the SLAs are going to look like, the work of this working group. So I will say they are being a good partner in that. As we said in front of the legislature, with such a significant change, there's going to be really substantive behind the scene conversations and negotiations. But they are at the table. We are having those conversations, and hopefully in the coming, I will say coming, I don't want to, what do they say? Over promise, under deliver. No, that's backwards. Anyway, in the coming weeks, we'll have news on that front. But certainly those conversations are happening. As we said in our communications, like, it's not lost on us that that's a top priority for a lot of our industry partners. We certainly heard at the legislature and the continued engagement we've been doing. So hopefully very soon, some great news on that front.
Awesome, because we are stoked. We just ordered more Metrc tags. Would love to have it be like the last for a couple of years. So
fair. Ben.
You were talking about sometimes meeting individually with us, like about specific challenges, especially with us with the nursery. What's the best way to get in touch with you to schedule something like that?
I think my emails are on the website. Ben, we have your email. I'll have myself, Lisa, Tracy, somebody ping you, and then we can set up a time to chat.
That'd be awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. So with that, again, thank you so much. Incredibly helpful on our end. We want to, in a good faith and sincere effort, have this conversation, and I'm excited to bring it back to Metrc, and I'm excited at the end of the day to have that work product and start developing some of the stuff that comes from this working group. But with that, I think we're a few minutes early. I always appreciate everybody's time. Again, know it's valuable, and I'm sure it's a pain in your ass to have to jump on a Metrc working group in the middle of a Tuesday, but sincerely from me and my team, thank you for that. So keep an eye out on your inboxes, and we can send around the third agenda and timing for the third meeting.
Thank you, Eric.
All right.
Thanks, Vern. Thanks, John.
Take care,
everyone.
everybody.
Appreciate it.
thanks.
Thank you.